further ado. So we're not going to go into a detailed explanation of what Crossrail is. Pretty sure you all know that by now. If you don't, we're happy to take questions as we go along. Look at the slides. We've triumphed, I think, in the media stakes in that you'll have seen on the news in London and probably nationally all of the breakthroughs that we've done through our tunnel boring machines. And you know, we've had 8 of those machines working their way across London over the last 2 or 3 years. And it's been a very good success story. And I think when you look at the progress that we've made, we're on the last kilometre. So both of the remaining machines, Victoria and Elizabeth, are on their way across to Farringdon. So the focus of our work has been making sure that we're ready to receive them and getting as much production out of them as possible. So within, well, by the end of May, certainly by the end of May, they'll have both finished. The bit that you've been looking at is some of the SCL works underground. So some of our platform tunnels are being built with sprayed concrete permanent lining with an in situ or a sprayed secondary lining. And these are big excavations. I don't know whether you could see them from where you were, but they're about 11 metres across, 10 or so metres high. They're very big holes in the ground. And if you think of the task that we've had in jacking London up with compensation grouting as we've been mining underneath, we've had relatively few instances where we've caused damage that we've had to manage. And I think that's tripping back to the thing that we set out to do at the start of Crossrail, which is to try to build Crossrail in as least disruptive way as possible, minimising the impact on the public. And I hope that we've done that. And it's always tempting to claim victory before we've finished, but touch wood, we're pretty much there. So I'll just now start to get into the contract a little bit. So let's be clear about what we as Crossrail set out to do. So we said we'd monitor the contractors' management of the work sites to ensure that they undertake their role safely, efficiently and in compliance with their obligations, require the contractors to improve their performance where necessary. That's what we set out to do. And what we said we wouldn't do was manage the construction activity on site. So we are not going to manage them, they are to manage themselves, and that's what the contract requires them to do. Similarly, when it comes to design, acting as technical authority for Crossrail, we act as the authority for Crossrail. We've got a series of other designers that work underneath us. We're going to define the requirements and manage the requirements. We're going to manage progressive assurance. So we're going to make sure that all the assurance documentation that's produced by all of the parties is correctly aligned. And we're going to maintain the design configuration of the contributing designers to make sure that the railway works. So that systems integration piece Crossrail are going to do. But we're not going to relieve the design of their obligations under CDM. So the designers have to design safely. We're not going to design the works, although I have to say there are probably 3 instances where we have done that. We've had to do that to keep the program going. One of the things that we have done in managing the contractors is look at progressive performance assurance. So look at how the contractors are performing against the works information in all the areas that we've defined. And we started, I think on this, can you see this from the back? I'm not sure whether you can see this. So we set some sort of boundaries on inputs, outputs for the different categories of performance that we're asking from the contractors in the contract. So that's a compliance line. So if the contractor complied with all the requirements of the works information, he would be above that line. If he complied with them in varying degrees, he'd reach about this point here. If he started to add value in what he was doing in the contracts, be measured in this area. And if he's absolutely world class, then he'd be in the top right. And what we were able to do through a sort of 6-monthly cycle of looking at performance is to track the contractor's continuous improvement against the parameters that we've set. So what we've been able to see is that performance assurance that we've been running has seen a progressive improvement in all areas by the contractors. And I think the more interesting point, maybe it's something that you take away and possibly think about, is that when contractors get it right consistently in a couple of areas, it's pretty right that they'll get it, at the end they'll get it right everywhere. So we don't see generally a contractor not performing well in one area but then performing well in the others. It's a sort of consistent performance across an organisation. And so when we are able to pull the performance of a contractor up, we can pull them up in all areas, and the evidence is that just by focusing on some very simple metrics, we can get better performance out of the contractors. I think if you can't monitor it, you can't manage it. So data has been probably one of the best stories from Crossrail. Some very good data to enable us to manage accurately. One of the things that the industry should be focusing on is, and I'm sure you can't read this at the back, so I should probably just read it out. So if you looked at the opportunity cost in rework, the Construction Industry Institute suggests that you can have between 3 and 12% of the project cost just spent reworking things to get them right. So if we can focus on getting it right first time, we can deliver the project more efficiently. And that's what we've been doing through looking at the way that we record observations of the contractors' activities and making sure that they raise the NCRs on their works and they are accountable for the quality of what they're producing. We do that in several areas by looking at their performance, and we've set some metrics which are below what we think the industry metrics are, and I won't try and read them out. Cheryl, I don't know whether we're making the slides available, but we are, so you'll be able to read this later at your leisure, hopefully. So setting targets on the data that we're collecting from the contractors to make sure that we get that performance out of them and know where we are with the cost of rework. So NEC for Crossrail. So these are a few statements, and I won't read them out verbatim, but from Sir Michael Latham. And the recommendation at the back is that the NEC contract is adopted for all the public sector works, which is what we've done on Crossrail. So if you looked at the suite of contracts, we wouldn't be saying we selected NEC, we were instructed to use it. So that's what we've done. If anybody asks, why did you use it?
I'm sure that's what Doug Oakley said.
I'm sure that's what he said, but I'll be and you're all familiar, hopefully, with that extract from Managing Reality, which is the key parties to the contract. So before I get David up, I just wanted to embed in your minds, who is doing what on Crossrail when it comes to NEC, because that's probably important for the discussion. So we've got the employer is the nominated employer is the program director. So the project manager under the contract is the area director. So for the way that we were previously structured in 3 areas, there were 3 area directors who were the project manager, with their representative being the project manager on a particular project like Bond Street, for example. The supervisor nominated is the head of quality, that's Crossrail's head of quality, and the supervisor's representative, the person on site discharging under delegation those roles, is the project field engineer. And so you all know the top of that slide because that's what the project manager does, and those are just extracts from the contract. But for Crossrail as the employer, we're looking to performance delivered by the relationship that's forged between the contractor and the project manager on site. So it's the project manager we're looking at, and his performance is absolutely critical to us in getting it right.
My name's David Morrice. I'm the Delivery Contracts Director. I've actually worked on Crossrail quite a long time now and was quite heavily involved in the procurement stage with Steve Rousel, who some of you might know. And for the last 4 or 5 years now, have really been doing the employer role post-contract. So all the guidance for the project managers, dealing with all the disputes, and really witnessing how our particular flavour and form of NEC is performing. And what I'm going to do today, as this is about NEC, is try and focus on what contracts we have, how we packaged it up, because I think that's quite important to the outcome we've got. Talk about some particular things about the way that we structured our NEC terms of contract. And we actually have got one of the principles we did have was not to tinker with it too much, not to have a fairly pure form of NEC contract. I do think we have done that. Just talk about the volume of change that we've had, because I think that's quite important. Some of the key issues that have emerged, and what I call the systems and solutions to those issues. So kind of hopefully give you an A to Z of NEC and Crossrail. And I would say that we are, in terms of the commercial story, we're halfway through. But we have got a very good indication of what makes it tick and how it's turning out. So again, any questions as we go through, please shout. Just to be clear, Crossrail, the bit we're talking about is the red part, the central tunnel section, which is the lion's share of Crossrail. The on-network part, the bit that goes out to Abbeywood and Reading now, to Shenfield, is being delivered by Network Rail. It's about £1 billion worth of work in their own, in their own way, not using NEC. So I understand. So we're talking about the central section. And someone asked how many contracts we have. This is broadly how it's. I would say that the major works contracts are packaged up. So we've got about, in terms of tunnels, portals, shafts, about £2.5 billion worth of option C contracts, 11 contracts. So they'll vary from what is about a £700 million tunnelling contract. We've got a couple of those, to down to a £40 million portal contract. So a range of size of contracts, about 11 number. We had some advanced civils contracts, which was really about, at the stations, getting the diaphragm walls in. So you would have seen some of that at Bond Street here. They were done earlier on as separate contracts. Again, 5 of those, option C. The station contracts, which is probably some of what you're seeing on site there. So this is the remaining construction and fit out of the stations, the M&E, the architecture of all the stations. About 9 contracts, again, all option C, about £1.5 billion worth. Typically a station, they do vary quite a lot. It can be 150, 250 million pounds for the fit out. Systems contracts. Now that's actually mostly dominated by one large contract, which is the permanent way, the power, the main fit out of the tunnel, our contract C610. But you've also got things like the signalling contract. I think it's about £60 million, and some power supply contracts, things like that. And we've got one option A systems contract, which is the platform edge doors. And then there's a few miscellaneous, about £150 million worth of miscellaneous contracts, including an option B, a couple of option A's, a few option C's, for various things. And then we've got our lion's share of our professional services contracts, design, delivery partners. We've used C&E for design, option C for the early part of the design, for the on-site services, option E. And we've got our delivery partners, the PDP and what we call project delivery partner and program partner, who are really the project management organisation and head office organisation within Crossrail, and about £1 billion worth there. Now I would say that's what I call the major works contracts for Crossrail. We have probably used, I think, almost every form of NEC contract. So the measured term contract, we used the framework form. We've almost used everything, apart from, I think, the management form of contract, I think, somewhere in Crossrail. It's quite good for us because you get a common language across all the contracts, a common understanding, common kind of clause numbers. So for a big program like contract, having a suite of different forms you can use and have standard adaptations that you have to have is quite convenient. And obviously what you'll see there, it's dominated by option C, which I think probably for major infrastructure programs and contracts is probably fairly common, and it's that really that we're now going to delve into and understand a bit more. So it's about £5 billion worth of construction contracts across 37 different packages, which is quite it's almost quite useful as a bit of a test bed for I think for NEC to see how it all pans out. So our terms. So just a few what I think are key things for our option C contracts. What we did do early on was very much try and learn the lessons from other major projects from the past, whether that be CTRL, more recently the East London Line, Jubilee Line, any of those major programmes, especially if they'd used NEC, all the LU projects that are going on. Obviously the one just here at Bond Street over the road, there's Tottenham Court Road, a number of programmes that have been going on and used NEC over the last few years. So we spent a lot of time trying to talking to those people and understanding the issues they'd had. What we've ended up with is a fairly simple, clean option C, 50-50 pay and gain with no fee over target. Lots and lots of debate around banding, pain and gain, and and you can make, personally I think you can make all sorts of arguments for doing it one way or another way and tie yourself in knots, to be honest. A straight 50-50, and I do think that has brought a simplicity and a focus that is that is much better than having some strange bandings that might sometimes drive behaviours that you don't want them to drive. The other thing is we've put a clause in there, I think a lot of clients put in now, that pain share is potentially applied progressively. So rather than ask for it at the end, ask for it back from the contractor. There is the option. In fact, it is a may in the contract. It's not a must, but we always do take pain share before you get past the point at which you can't take it anymore. In fact, I would say we kind of encourage it being taken earlier because at least it gives an opportunity to do something about it then. Now that change to the standard NEC does, to my mind, dramatically affect the way, and I think for the good, that the whole commercial dynamics of the contract operate. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. You see we've got quite a number of contracts with a lot of interfaces. And so if you take Bond Street Station here, we had an advanced works contractor came in and did the diaphragm walls to start with, and did they dig down the first contractor? They did, didn't they? Yeah. And dug out. We've had the tunnelling contractor drive through those boxes at some point, probably before they're dug down actually. They're all different sequences, I forget.
All different sequences everywhere.
Yeah. And then we hand over to a stations contractor the box and the tunnel to a stations contractor on Bond Street. So you've got quite a number of interfaces there that have either liquidated or unliquidated damages on, some quite substantial sums. I think the highest is £100,000 a day on some of the tunnelling contracts. Typically it will be £30,000 a day. So significant amounts on hanging on time, which for us is obviously critical for the overall programme, but also for managing those interfaces. We've put in a duty for the contractor to mitigate the effect of compensation events, which has actually turned out to be quite, again, because of the whole time element, quite an issue for us at this time. Limits of liability, 30%, but excludes pain, damages and disallowed costs. So actually all the things that really make the commercial contract tick, there is no limit of liability on there. Now, when we were tendering these contracts, I think set our stall out early on that some things were not negotiable, and stood by that. And I think by and large all contracts are consistent, broadly consistent in that respect, which was a good thing. We've got a thing called a geotechnical baseline report, just a little bit different. I don't know whether any of you have heard of that, but it's purely used as a tool to measure away from, in respect of unforeseen ground conditions, or 6012, isn't it? 60.112, I think it is. So it sets out what the contractor, I'll say it should expect to find, and it's purely commercially. It's not a technical document. Purely sets out kind of commercially beyond which they would get a compensation event. And I think by and large, I mean, it's very hard to say with things that, well, has that been a good thing or not? I think by and large it has, and I say that because we've had very, very few differences of opinion on ground conditions, which on a programme like Crossrail you would think would be one of our major problems. So there's some lessons to be learnt. They need to be very clearly drafted and unambiguous, and I think sometimes they're not, but by and large I think they've been good.
I think it was aimed at getting some consistency in the tender process as well, wasn't it?
Right.
Which I think
Yeah.
is what you're sort of implying through the defining the compensation events, things like.
It was a risk-based drop document, so the client's designer went through and looked at the ground parameters that the contractor would expect, how they were to be measured, so it's the test on whether they've seen what they expected or not, plus when it came to unforeseen conditions like piles in the ground or wells or any features which we couldn't reasonably predict in advance. But it's the known unknown sort of stuff. We put in a quantum for the contractor to expect to hit 2 of these and 2 of these, so that we had a basic price for dealing with the issue. Yeah. And it has worked very well.
Yeah, I think so.
And those unknowns included, initially it included how many unexploded bombs to allow for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we haven't found any. No.
Yeah.
Somebody else found them for us.
So no retention on our contracts. We've got PCGs and performance bonds, which again we set our stall out fairly early in terms of insisting on ultimate parent PCGs. And we've got project bank accounts with trust deeds. Again, are they a good thing? Do they work? I mean, I would say, again, it's very difficult to say. I mean, the whole point about project bank accounts is about getting the money down through the supply chain as quickly as possible. That is the intention. It's actually quite hard to draw data out that demonstrates that genuinely has happened, but I think anecdotally we probably think it has. There is no commercial reason for the contractor to hang on to the cash if it's in a project bank account on which he's getting no interest, and it doesn't matter if it's in the account or not. The other good
the Crossrail project bank account I think goes down to tier 2, does it don't?
Well, it's held in trust for the tier 2. It's a fairly simple model in that it doesn't require joint signatory to get the money out or anything like that. It is the contractor's money that is, in theory, held in trust for the subcontractor if something was to happen to the main contractor. I think they have been broadly successful. The other good thing, again, for big, for £5 billion worth of defined cost, you're getting to see all this stuff on a fairly common platform through the PBAs, which is just kind of useful, actually. So that I would say are the key things that define our type of option C contract.
So you can just explain the no fee over target.
Ah, right. Okay. So on defined cost, once if the target was 100 million, once defined cost plus the target, the contractor doesn't actually get any fee, doesn't get paid fee on the defined cost that's over that target. Yeah.
Is there a reason why you took that approach with project bank accounts rather than that as soon as the money goes in to pay for that a month's worth of work, it doesn't automatically go to each of the parties straight away?
I think administration. I think there are not. There are a number of models, I think, especially now as PBOs have developed more, of how to set them up. But one thing they can do, I think, the more complicated they are, is they can add levels of administration. It's effectively just an account that is, it's the contractor's account, effectively.
So how long ago was your setup?
Well, 4 or 5 years ago now, Steve, wasn't it, at least, if not more?
2010.
Yeah.
2009.
Yeah, and probably thought about before then. So
Well, I
quite
used
some
to
time.
recently, about 3 years ago, but they can be quite simple to do.
Yeah.
Go to each party straight away.
Yeah, okay. So just moving on. I just want to talk about change a bit and how much change we've had. This is actually just a snapshot out of our board report, so that our board is interested in this sort of stuff. Just shows how many compensation events we've had. So this is a couple of periods old, but 16,912 compensation events raised.
Is this across all contracts, Dave?
Yeah. This is across all major works contracts. I guess the 37 we were looking at. 1.5 billion. It's an average value of 90,000, I think. Open at that point in time was 1,000, 287 million. And so implemented 12,000. So the balance between those numbers would have been rejected. That makes sense. So that was on there somewhere. So a lot of change, and one of the I guess and when we come to the next slide, one of the issues is dealing with change, and can a contract like NEC or any contract indeed deal with that volume of change. Actually, I would say yes. It can. It brings some certain things you need to do in a certain way, and it can be problematic. But I would say yes, it is possible.
You've achieved it, haven't you? And not presumably one piece of change, some policy could affect therefore 37 plus contracts.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Slightly misleading. It's not.
Yeah.
Change.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we issue the instruction to change something within a station requirement,
Bang. Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
bang,
yeah,
it hits
yeah.
at 9 stations
Yeah.
straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't quite know what the balance is
No.
on that, but yeah, so there is some of that in there. So I'm just going to talk about from an again, this is an NEC contract perspective, and we're halfway through here. The key things, probably no surprise to most of you, is the most difficult commercial part of NEC contract, probably any construction contract, is time assessments. Now, NEC obviously sets out to do this in a particular way, which is prospective. At the time, do it prospectively. And I think that is a very good thing, an admirable thing to do. But it is difficult. And I think the drafting could be clearer and better. And I think there are some ambiguities and room for interpretation. And we're not helped here because we don't have lots of case law, we don't have examples to look at to help us. But personally, again, my personal view, the whole attempt to do things prospectively is exactly the right thing to do. To try and agree as much as you can as you go is absolutely the right thing to do. But it is, time assessments can be very, very problematic, especially if you've got many of them running at the same time, or and some large and difficult issues. But that, by and large, is from a commercial perspective, and especially if you think about our structure of our contracts and the significant damages we've got on dates and things, for very good reason, is absolutely our number one commercial problem with contractors. No final account provisions. Again, and I actually, I'll explain why this is an issue, but we've kind of dealt with it in quite a pragmatic way, I think. I do find NEC slightly strange in that it just kind of peters out at the end, and there's a kind of, I think there's a final certificate, I'm not sure, but I do think something that put a stake in the ground and said, you know, Mr. Project Manager, at this point you tell them what you think your final assessment is, and then, you know, some sort of process. It's got loads and loads of process in there, but nothing for the end. So I just think it would be very helpful personally to everyone. Early pain or damages, pain share especially, forces the commercial pace. So I said that I think this is a very, very good provision that we have put in there. That means that early on we take pain share, and we have quite a number of contracts, or a few contracts, where we are applying significant amounts of pain share well before completion, and with, you know, in the millions. Now,
just to be clear on that, Dave, you're just taking the pain, but not paying any gain.
Yes,
in advance.
yeah, gain share is only paid after completion.
Heads I win, tails you lose.
Well, now, I think that personally, again, I think that is a very good thing, because what it does is it forces the parties to actually try and deal with the issues at the time. And what I said there, it forces the commercial pace. What it discourages the parties from doing is leaving it to the end to sort it out, which I think is everyone, I think, is predisposed to do, but I think it is it does not get things necessarily agreed in the best way. And so I've put it there as a key issue. It's an issue, and also I think it's a benefit of the way we structured them. Key issues: failure to act, PM or contractor or both. Because the NEC is so proceduralised, if someone doesn't follow that process and procedure, be it the project manager or the contractor, or worse, both, if they don't do that, it leaves you in a very, very tricky position as employer, as the client, because you're not quite sure where you are. So if you don't process your compensation events, if you don't do it in a timely fashion, if you just end up with loads of stuff unagreed at the end, swilling around, I really don't know quite where that leaves you, actually, apart from with a big mess that you probably would have had under an NEC form of contract, sorry, an ICE form of contract, to sort out. So I would say, and we'll come to the tools and that we've used, the drumming into the people, you know, Mr. Project Manager, you do not have a choice here. You have to administer this contract. That is your job. You have to get on with it. Volume of change, we've spoken about that. And again, there are tools, I'll talk about on the next slide to deal with that. I put value engineering on there, probably something that's close to Chris's heart, actually. I don't know, Chris, maybe I think you need to go careful with value engineering, that you're not just introducing change for the sake of change, and got to consider fully the effects of all the way down the stream of the value engineering.
Yeah, I think having just described the way in which the change might be managed in contract, you can see that value to one party might not be value to another. And so, you know, good ideas too late probably don't really help you. And what it does is it drives you to, I think it should be driving you to not change things. So the consequence being significant drives you not to change things, because you need some certainty in the outcome of the contract and the planning around the contract. I have seen a few examples of value engineering too late, which have led to a greater cost rather than less cost.
Yeah, definitely. We've got owner-controlled insurance policy, so we've actually taken out the insurance, and just how that works with a shared risk option C contract is actually quite interesting when you get into the detail of it. I would say option, overarching option C is it's all about sharing the risk of pain or gain, because you've got to remember every pound over the target, we as client, we're paying half of that. So it is a shared risk contract. But it is a shared risk contract, but up to a point. And some of the disagreements are about where is that point at which it does not become a shared risk. And I'll give you an example on disallowed cost. Clearly correcting defects after completion. You don't pay the contractor for that. It's their risk. They have to pay for it. And I think some of the issues we had have been around defining that point. And sometimes we have disagreements within our own organisation about where is that point at which this becomes not a shared risk, but all the contractor's risk. And that's sometimes quite an interesting debate. So, on to my last slide. I've called this systems and solutions. Stuff that we've done to try and help us manage our way through those issues we've had. So, I put there train all levels of staff, especially PMs. So we've done a lot of NEC training. I mean, we have, I would say, a fairly big, capable project management organisation. We've got a lot of tell people. We've probably got every major, sort of organisation who does this stuff involved on the project somewhere. And we've got some very, very good people. But we've had to make sure we train them and kind of do some more training and make sure that everyone is really on board and bought into making the NEC contract work and managing it properly.
Has that included joint training?
We haven't done joint training, no. I mean, I think we've always felt that. I say that I think we've encouraged individual project managers to jointly discuss how they're going to run the contract with their contractors. But what we haven't done is kind of impose external. We've not seen it as.
It was one of the things that came up at the NEC Free Users Group conference a week or two ago. The benefit of having a common understanding of how the contract will be administered, a common understanding of how cost will be allocated between defined cost and fee and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You don't look persuaded, but
no. I mean, we've in my role as managing the suites, I've had many conversations with contractors about what we think our understanding of the contract is and what they think is, and I don't see that as training. I see that as kind of expressing opinions about. Actually, you mind just taking one step back. I didn't cover that last point. Disallowed costs, not a significant issue for Crossrail. Now, I think it's running at, I can't remember, 1.5% or something. I can get the exact stats if anyone's interested. But I think there has been examples of previous projects or programs trying or having to rely on the disallowed cost clauses because they haven't got anything else, because they haven't got a pain gain mechanism that actually operates or that bites at the right point. And I think because we've got that, and because we've kind of been fairly upfront about where the commercial levers are, which is pain and gain share. We've paid gain share as well, significant amounts of gain share and damages. We don't need to have any dysfunctional behaviour about looking at disallowed costs. We've always taken disallowed costs very seriously. We've got a big cost verification team who look at all the costs, disallow stuff up front, and there's a conversation with the contractor. And it really isn't a substantial issue for us, and we do not expect it to be a substantial issue. You're going to have periphery issues about stuff, but on the scale of things, it is a fairly small beer, which I think is a good thing. Sorry, coming back to this, train all levels of staff. NEC is not an easy option. I think I've probably hinted at this quite a lot. You have to apply it. You can't ignore it. You have to follow the processes and procedures. We've got a thing called a contract administration manual, which I think It's common across the programme, helps all our project managers understand what we expect of them, backs up the, about managing the contract. Understand and explain time assessments. We spent a lot of time, which probably we shouldn't have to do, getting our head round, and with the PMs and with the contractors actually, what a sensible way of doing this time assessments is. Spoken to a lot of experts in the industry, and who also probably didn't understand how it was supposed to be done, to be honest. So that's been a very, very interesting process. This is why my number one issue was assessment of time. PMs must act regardless of the contractor. I think drumming again into PMs that just because your contractor isn't doing something doesn't give you the excuse then to not react and not respond. Two wrongs don't make a right in NEC, they just make a bit of a mess. PMs have got to get on with it. And I've said that proactively manage the commercial risks. So this is more of an employer thing, and this is more about a programme the size of Crossrail. What you can't do is just draft these contracts, set them off into the world with the project managers and contractors, and expect to come back in 3 or 4 years and take the keys. We have had to sometimes intervene. You spoke about incentives. We've done various fairly modest incentives, but we have sometimes tweaked and twiddled. We've spoken to contractors. We've talked to them all the way through on the commercials. You have to do that. You have to nurture this thing along. And so we have and continue to proactively manage our commercial risks with our contractors and be very open and honest with them at all levels, at senior level as well. If we see a problem, we'll tell them that. Some of them aren't always ready to listen or don't actually want to listen, and I think it's important that we are able to explain that to them at the right level as well. So that all said, I've actually at the end I've got a bit of a success story, because what I would say, of the 9 major contracts complete, so that's beyond completion, commercially 7 of them are settled, done, finished. In fact, I've probably got an email that says 8. I think it's probably 8 now. And the 9th one is well on its way. And I would say the other ones that we've got coming to completion, so I'll give you an example, our C300 tunnels contract, which was from Royal Oak Portal all the way through to Farringdon, including the SCL enlargements you would have seen here at Bond Street, is coming to an end in July, August, somewhere around there. We are well on our way, having a probably quite a tough conversation with the contractor about the commercials on that contract. And I think if we hadn't structured the contracts the way we have there, we may not be having that conversation. We may be just storing up more of a bigger problem for further down the line, which is very difficult to resolve when everyone has cleared off to the next job.
In fairness to David, what David did do, and it was David that did it, was in looking at the halfway there discussion that we were having with contractors, we did a halfway there commercial discussion with them as well. So what does the contract look like now? And bringing some realism between the local project director and their board as to what the commercial position was, so that we didn't build up a problem to the end, so there was no the lack of transparency from the local teams through to the board, so they didn't end up having to defend themselves within the last few weeks of the contract. Yeah,
and I think NEC can help you do that if you try and agree as much as you can as you go.
You described the hard work to get there, which is not surprising on a project of this scale.
Yeah.
So where do you think you might have been had you not have used both the combination of the hard work and all those sort of NEC principles? What might that last bullet say?
I think it would actually, I think you're right, it would be quite easy to actually settle this out and then not manage it very well and end up with a big mess. Yeah. Using NEC or any form of contract. Yeah, I do think, you can't say horses for courses, isn't it? And you've got different situations, but I think we probably would have had a lot less agreed and a lot more dispute and serious dispute. And as you know, serious dispute just burns up cash and time, and usually no one's a real winner. I think you probably get to the answer quicker with this way. And the key to me is nailing as much as you can as you go at the time.